Now available in paperback and e-readers. Isis, Bride of Dracula, and Goddess Next Door and John Haynes team up to take on the Dark Vampire Lord in this action-packed Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Bride of Dracula in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers today. As the release date for the Black Panther in the movie draws near, the rhetoric from the Afro-American Negro gets more and more mind-boggling as the days go by. And one of the most mind-boggling and completely insane concepts that come out of the mouth of some of these Negroes is the whole concept of Blaxit. And under this whole Blaxit concept, some of these Afro-American Negroes are proposing that they leave the United States and go to Africa to build a country just like Wakanda. And I listened to that whole argument, and it's completely mind boggling because when I take a look at many of the communities that many of these Afro American Negroes come from, like the South Bronx, and I say to myself, how are you going to build a Wakanda or a Wakanda like country when you can't even run your own community? Because I look at the black community and I look at the infrastructure for the black community, and none of it is black owned. When we look at the black community, Arabs run most of the grocery stores and the fast food restaurants. Indians control franchise restaurants like McDonald's, Dunkin' Donuts, and Burger Kings and Popeyes. We have white people who run your supermarkets and Hispanic people who run your supermarkets. We have Koreans who control our hair care market. And we have these Negroes sitting here talking about they're going to do a Blaxit where they go to Africa and they're going to build something when many of them have no real skills or experience at building anything because others who are non-black and white control most of your economic infrastructure and control most of your resources. So again, how are you going to leave the United States, go 8,000 miles away, and build a so-called technologically advanced country when you control no resources in your own community? All your resources are controlled by whites and foreigners, but you're going to go build something in somebody else's country. Again, a mind-bogglingly, completely insane concept that only comes from the mind of the dysfunctional Afro-American Negro. And I listen to them talk about this again, and I look at the state of their community, and they're sitting there talking about building a Wakanda when I look at their community and it has the highest crime rate, it has the highest drug rate, and it has the highest abortion rate. But you have the Afro-American Negro talking about he's going to Blaxit and go build something better someplace else. And again, this is all from the mind of this dysfunctional Afro-American Negro who sits there and talks about building something better when he can't even maintain what he had before, because we had a literal Wakanda in the black community before the white liberal welfare state and the feminist movement came in. What were neighborhoods like Sugar Hill? What were neighborhoods like Harlem? What were neighborhoods like some parts of the South Bronx? These were literal black communities, and while they weren't so-called technologically advanced, they had strong families, and they had a strong structure, and they had a strong infrastructure. I mean, I think about places like Black Wall Street before it was burned out. We had places that we could have built up for ourselves. Unfortunately, most of these Afro-American Negroes love white people too much to appreciate what they have. And this is what Lorraine Hansberry presented in her classic play, A Raisin in the Sun. Because if you take a look at A Raisin in the Sun, the reason why they weren't able to have anything is because the big problem was they were spellbound by the whole concept of white acceptance and wanting the White House. The White House was more important than having a black business. Now, the son really didn't know how to do a black business, but his heart was in the right place. He had this dream to be an entrepreneur, and that's something that is paramount towards building a black community. Unfortunately, the mother and the sister and the wife, they wanted the house in the white neighborhood. And this is what prevents black people from having the literal Wakanda that they want, is that they love white people too much. And when it comes down to the Afro-American Negro, unless there is a white person there to be there at his side and validate him he does not consider anything having any sort of real value. So the whole concept of Blaxit is completely dysfunctional when you understand the mind of the Afro-American Negro. Because if you take this Afro-American Negro away from that white man that he deifies and worships, he will fall completely apart. So they're sitting there talking about Blaxit when it really isn't about Blaxit, because again, they had all the tools and the resources to build a black community. Unfortunately, the mind of the Afro-American Negro is too spellbound to go and build his own community or take care of his own community. But you have these so many of these Afro-American Negroes talking about they're gonna Blaxit, build something in somebody else's country, and they're not, and it's going to be just like the Wakanda in the Marvel comics. And again, this is a mind-boggling concept, because why does it take you having to want to build something made up in a white person's imagination, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, rather than come up with your own vision? That shows me how dysfunctional the mindset of many of these Afro-American Negroes is. You want to build a Wakanda, but that whole concept comes from the mind of a white person. So everything that you want to do comes from the idea of a white person, but it doesn't come from your own imagination and your own vision. Again, we had our own community. We had neighborhoods like Harlem. We had neighborhoods like Sugar Hill. But the big problem with the Afro-American Negro is that he does not value anything that comes from his own hand, nor does he value anything that comes from the hands of other black people. And that's why he cannot have a strong neighborhood or a strong community, because again, all the tools are there for you to have this, and we did have it during the period before the white feminist movement and the white liberal came with his welfare state. You had strong black families, you had strong black communities, and you had strong black infrastructure, because many of those townhouses in Harlem and places like Sugar Hill, many of those entire blocks were owned by wealthy black people who worked together to maintain a community. But you can't explain this to the modern day Negro, because the modern day Negro, he's so enamored by white people and white people's ideas that he sits there and talks about the imaginary concept of Blaxit, when we know this Afro-American Negro ain't going nowhere, because this Afro-American Negro loves white people too much to even think about leaving the country and all of its creature comforts to go to an Africa filled with hostile Africans who believe that they are actually better than this Afro-American Negro, and will literally express their contempt at everywhere he goes in their land if he were to call himself going to do a so-called Blaxit. Because if he did a so-called Blaxit, he would run into so much resistance it wouldn't be funny, because it's not his land, it's not his property, and when it comes down to those Africans, they believe that they are better than this Afro-American Negro. They believe that they're superior to this Negro, and they believe that the white man loves them more than they love this Negro. So this Negro will sit there and come up with this imaginary concept because he sees a movie coming out. And again, the only reason why he's coming up with these concepts is because it's based on a white person's idea of Africa, and he wants to get white validation and white approval, and he wants to get the attention of that white man he loves so much. So that's why he's coming up with this whole concept of Blaxit and coming up with this idea, because he really wants to get attention and approval from white people. And the only reason why he wants to envision this is because a white person envisioned it. If another black person were to come up with the whole concept of building up the black community, you would hear most of these Negroes dismiss this person, ignore this person, or absolutely pay this person no attention. If this black person started talking about buying property in his own neighborhood, building up apartment buildings for other black people, he would get next to no support. If somebody started talking about buying and building black businesses and employing black people, you would not hear any sort of gratitude from many of these Negroes, because the whole idea of doing that type of hard work, they don't see it as having any value unless there is some way that they can get some attention from a white person or some sort of approval from a white person, because all the tools, again, are there for this Negro to go out and build his own black community, and all the resources are there for him to go out and build his own black community. The only thing keeping him from doing that is primarily himself, because he is primarily seeing a white person as better than he is, and he doesn't see a value in being a black person unless a white person is there to pat him on the back and tell him that he's good. And that's what's really sad about all this rhetoric regarding this whole Black Panther movie and that whole Blaxit concept, is that you don't have to leave the United States, the country that you were born in, the country that you built, the country that your ancestors built, because again, you can make this a literal place like a Wakanda. You can make it a technologically advanced civilization, and you have all the tools and resources to do this, but you can't tell this to the Negro because the Negro does not see value in blackness. The Negro does not see worth in blackness. The Negro does not see value in being black or see greatness in blackness. All he sees is value in a white person, and if a white person tells him something is good, then it only has value. Because I look at all these Negroes talking about Blaxit, and again, they're not going anywhere because there's no white people there for them to seek validation and approval from. Because again, I look at their communities, and if they left if their communities look like this, then if they went to Africa, it would look even worse. Because if they cannot control the economy in their own communities, they cannot control the infrastructure in their own communities, they cannot control the resources in their own communities, and they cannot stop and they cannot control the family in their communities, because that's why we have all these single parent households, then how are they going to go 9,000 miles away to go build up somebody else's land when they can't even take care of the resources they have in their own community? Answer that question for me, and then you can start talking about a Blaxit. If you'd like to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. And if you want to try some of my SJS Direct Fantasy publications, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.